Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of series that I started in 2020. I made a list at the end of 2019 of series that I wanted to pick up, and we're going to reflect on that list, see how poorly I did at actually picking up books from that list versus books that weren't on that list. Starting with that list, the books that I had said I wanted to pick up, the series that I wanted to pick up, we have Steelheart, Icewind Dale, Codex Alera, Sailor Moon, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, Stormcrow, Gilded Wolves, Unwind, Malice, Something by Guy Gabriel Kay, Half a King, Ninth House, Rage of Dragons, The Last Kingdom, Vagabond, Golden Kamuy, 20th Century Boys, Warcross, and Caraval. That comes out to a total of 18 different series that I wanted to start, of which I only started 4 on that list, which is really pathetic. The red list is purely the ones that I picked up and completed. The DNF/DNS would be books I didn't even start or the books that I didn't complete. For example, I really want to come back to Malice by John Gwynne. That is something I picked up, but I didn't complete it. So that's why I have it listed as DNF and DNS. And then I have a will category, which is will read. I still am planning on reading some of these before the end of the year, and the 2 that I'm still planning to pick up would be Warcross by Marie Lu and Sailor Moon, 2 of the smaller ones on this list. This won't just be stats. I will talk a little bit about the ones that I had picked up, but I also want to inform you of the ones that I read that were not on the list to kind of save face a little bit, because I did actually start a decent amount. So all the books that I started, all the series I started that were not on that list are Foundryside, Senlin Ascends, Queens of Renthia, The Queen's Thief, Iron Fae, Wicked Saints, Bonecryer's Moon, Ninth Reign, House of Dragons, Spin the Dawn, Forest of Souls, Girls of Paper and Fire, Fireborn, Scavenge the Stars, The Cyborg Tinkerer, Traitor's Blade, Lies of Loch Lamora, and The Knife of Never Letting Go. Just like with the previous list, I also have some books that I am planning to read by the end of the year. Fingers crossed I actually get to them, and those books would be Jade City, Woven in Moonlight, and The Bear and the Nightingale. So I actually started 18 different series that were not on the list, and then the 4 that were on the list, which means I started a total of 22 series, and then technically within that I read 26 because I did finish The Queens of Renthia, I read the sequel to Spin the Dawn, and I read the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely. The DNF/DNS category didn't change because all of the series that I picked up that were not originally on the list, I ended up completing all of those books, so I didn't DNF any of the other ones. Of the series that I started, like I said, there were 22 total series that I started. I will or have already continued with 9 of them. That's not very good in my opinion. I feel like to not even have half of them be series that I want to continue with is a little bit of a bummer. I'm excited that I tried so many different ones, but I am a little sad that I didn't want to keep going with a fair amount of these. I'm actually on the fence as to whether I'll continue on with Foundryside. I am intrigued to where I could see myself picking up the sequel, but I'm not in any hurry, and I think there are a lot of other books that are going to be prioritized first because there are a lot that I really want to get to. So this one's kind of a maybe I will, maybe I won't. Iron Fae by Julie Kagawa. This was one of her first works. I enjoyed the Shadow of the Fox trilogy very much by this author, and so I wanted to read one of her older works. This one didn't really do it for me. Obviously, I'm not continuing on with this one, but it was kind of an older YA fantasy book. It had more of a middle grade feel to it. It's a Fae story, and it's actually a Fae story where the Fae are very wicked and very mischievous. They're all tricksters. It's very dangerous to go into the Fae world, but our main character has to in order to try and save her little brother who's been kidnapped, and then they're navigating this world not knowing what the heck is going on or what they're doing. It had some really creepy elements to it, but the romance was a little cringy for me in the book, and while I thought the twist of how the author handles Faye's weakness in the story was a really cool way to bring that back in to a modern work. I ultimately just thought that the tone was I don't mind youthful tones. I just felt like this one was maybe a little too young for me. Wicked Saints is a book that I have said is a combination of the Grisha trilogy and Nevernight, and that combination just didn't really work. I thought it was very edgy and bloody. I don't think I've ever read a book that uses the word blood more. It makes sense. The magic system has to do with blood. But yeah, it was just a little too edgelord-y for me. Bonecryer's Moon had a fantastic setup. I really loved the concept behind this. It was very unique. You have these women who have this siren song, essentially, and it calls down their one true love, who they then have to kill in order to become somebody who helps ferry the spirits of the dead into the afterlife. This is like their rite of passage into having this ability, which they have to be able to do in order to keep the dead spirits from being stuck on our own world and then preying on the living. So it's one of those, it's a terrible thing to have to kill an innocent man, except for they have to do this to keep the world safe, and I think that immediately creates very great stakes. And there's other things tied to the magic that are really cool, but it has kind of a enemies to lovers trope in it, and I don't hate that trope. I think that trope can be really fun. I just didn't find myself caring too much about whether the characters ended up together, and in this book, I feel like that trope is a pretty heavy part of it, and so it didn't really click with me, this particular couple. But if it sounds cool to you, I would highly recommend it, especially around the fall season. It has kind of some spooky vibes going on without actually being scary. Forest of Souls was a book that had a really cool main character who is training to become the queen's spy, assassin, thief, just kind of all around do the queen's bidding. And in trying to pursue this, they get themselves caught up in some stuff that sets them on a very bizarre path. This book is difficult to talk about because I feel like the plot kind of went in a lot of different directions. I either wanted it to be a longer book where I could have spent more time getting to know things, or for it to have kind of been more specific with its focus. Girls of Paper and Fire, I thought, dived into some very deep, darker themes that were very heavy and very important, and it did this in a fantasy world, which I think was really cool. I didn't feel that the book needed to be as fantastical, though. Bizarrely, even though I love fantasy, I actually kind of wish this book had been light on its fantasy and really spent more time on the themes, because the main character is forced to become essentially a part of a harem, and she finds herself very much falling in love with one of the other women who is there, and that's very frowned upon. That can't happen, so you have kind of the forbidden lovers trope, while also having to watch somebody be taken into doing things they don't want to do. And I think the author handled this topic with a lot of care, but they also were prepping for the continuation of this series by laying the groundwork for the other fantastical things. And I didn't care about those things. I would have preferred to kind of have it be a standalone and just have been longer. Next up is Scavenge the Stars, and this one was a Count of Monte Cristo retelling. We have two main point of views, and one of them, I'm constantly being told throughout the book that they are very suave and they're kind of a trickster, but then they act kind of like a bumbling idiot a lot of the times. And so I didn't love that I never really saw this character behaving in a way that I thought was fitting of the descriptions of them. The other character was awesome, and I think they're the ones that are trying to get revenge, and seeing the consequences of pursuing revenge was done really well with them. But there was also kind of some twists and turns in the book that I thought were really brilliant, but because of the way that the book is set up, which I believe is similar to how the book is set up based off of its source material, the Count of Monte Cristo, it follows a similar plot and also timeline. And unfortunately, by following that timeline, it made it so that we didn't get as much from the twist later as we could have if we had just tweaked the timeline. I feel like that doesn't really make a lot of sense without being able to talk spoilers. But if it sounds cool to you, if you like the idea of something inspired by Count of Monte Cristo, this one I think would be probably pretty cool for you. The Cyborg Tinkerer is a steampunk sci-fi space adventure romance story. Heavy emphasis on the romance in this one. I'm really not a big romance reader. If you like action adventure romance and you like the really fast-paced, it's a competition story, kind of, sort of. And if you like that sort of thing, I think you'll really like this book. But I am just so not a big romance reader. I occasionally like a fantasy romance. I'm not entirely opposed to it. I definitely have to be in the mood for it. And also, I'm not the biggest steampunk sci-fi person, so that's another thing too. So like, it was more of a genre thing. It's just very much not really my genre. Next up, we have The Lies of Loch Lamora. This is a heist story that follows a merry band of misfits, if you will, who are thieves. I thought the book was an interesting tone. Somebody compared it to Quentin Tarantino once in my comments section, and I was like, I think that's very accurate. And also, I'm not the biggest fan of Quentin Tarantino, but if you like Quentin Tarantino's works, then you'll probably like Lies of Loch Lamora. I also was really expecting this amazing friendship that everybody talked about all the time, and I just didn't really see it. I felt like it was like about as basic. I'm gonna stop because I know the fans of that series really love their Locke and Shaw, and I just didn't, so I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. It was not for me. Traitor's Blade was one that I thought was so fun when I first started it. I really liked the tone of it. It's definitely a swashbuckling good old time. But as the story progressed, it meandered a lot. I didn't really love how certain things were handled, and some of the scenes are like really bizarre, and there are definitely a lot of things in the first book, which I have heard this gets better in the later books, but there's a lot of very convenient things that happen in the book, and I didn't really, the more it went, the less I liked it, which was unfortunate, but that's okay. It's fun. If you think that the idea of these three individuals who are really good friends, who are trying to uphold important ideals, if that sounds like a fun time to you, then I would definitely check it out. Next up, I had wanted to read something by Guy Gabriel Kay. I ended up picking up Under Heaven. I actually did technically DNF this one. It should go in the DNF category, but I'm considering it under the read because I did read a decent amount of it, and I read enough of it that I could give you commentary. I would never count it as read, like, on Goodreads. I don't use Goodreads anyway, but just for the sake of being able to let you all know, I did not care for Guy Gabriel Kay's writing style. It's very detail-oriented. It took like 20 pages before there was actual present-day dialogue of any sort. It was a lot of like, this is what this area looks like, and here's also a little bit about the character's past, and here's some information about this one lady that he used to sleep with, and then it's just like a lot of description, which is fine. And then once we finally do get around to the characters, it was a lot of just kind of men thinking about and wishing that they could bang ladies. Like, they were like, I haven't slept with a lady in a really long time, or like, I can't wait to get back to the city so I can sleep with a prostitute, or things like that. Which, the premise of the book, the guy receives a really amazing grand gift of these horses, but then they know for a fact that it's a really stupid gift to be given because these horses are worth a lot of money, and there's no way he can walk around with all these horses without being in danger. So they're like, why the heck? But he also can't refuse the gift because it's given to him by some people who are very important. So he's got to figure out how to deal with this situation. It was a very interesting setup, I guess, but this one was definitely not for me. Last two would be Ninth House and Rage of Dragons. Ninth House is, kind of what I was saying about the Wicked Saints being a little too edgy. This one I also thought was a little bit extra edgy, and it was fine. It's a dark academia story. This one particular character has the ability to see greys, which are ghosts, and that's not really a common ability. They shouldn't really be able to do this, but because of this ability, the secret societies at the elite schools have recruited her, and her life, you get her backstory. And in typical Leigh Bardugo fashion, the backstory I think is written really well. It is very difficult to read because of some of the events that occur. But ultimately, the present day plotline and the use of a split timeline, I'm not opposed to that. I really like it in the series, The Vicious and Vengeful books by V.E. Schwab. I think split timelines can be brilliantly executed, but there's the way this one was executed, it didn't quite click for me. I didn't really like the main character. I felt like, again, similar to the Guy Gavriel Kay book, it was very detail oriented, and I'm not a very detail oriented reader. So not for me. And then that said, jumping into the last one, Rage of Dragons. This one, I really liked the magic system. I think the world had a lot of potential. It was very cool. The setup is we have this caste system, and we have a character who is part of the lower classes, and through some unfortunate situations, they end up losing somebody that they care about and then want revenge. And they have the potential to become the symbol for the lower classes, might become something bigger than themselves. I love that, except for that our main character constantly was like, screw that whole like being the champion for the lower classes. I want revenge. And they're just an idiot. And I have friends that love the book, and I have this collaborative channel called World Hoppers for those of you that love Rage of Dragons. I'll link the Rage of Dragons Gush Fest because it was a lot of fun. But I really have a hard time handling really stupid characters, and I just thought that this character was a complete idiot. Now to the series that I'm going to continue, where I don't have to be so negative, be a negative Nancy. So, Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This one is more literary fantasy, in my opinion, than just straight fantasy. So if you're expecting a typical elves and dwarves and swords and stuff like that, you're really not going to get it. It follows a man who gets separated from his wife when they go to the Tower of Babel on their honeymoon. And then he's looking for her for the rest of the book. And it's kind of really depressing, actually. And poor Senlin is like the most clueless tourist ever. And while I couldn't stand the stupidity of Tao in Rage of Dragons, I found that Thomas Senlin's kind of sort of stupidity was so realistic that it made it sad to read. And also it's one of those like, I always like to imagine I would be Kaladin from the Stormlight Archive or Vin from Mistborn, but in actuality, most of us would be Thomas Senlin and have no idea what we're doing and hold so strongly to our ideals of like, this can't possibly be how this is, even though it's very clearly right in front of you. It's weird. It's such a weird book, but I absolutely plan on continuing with this series. Queens of Renthia, I did continue, and I finished this trilogy. It has a forest setting where these crazy spirits want to slaughter humans all the time, and the humans have to have this queen who uses her magic to hold the spirits in check, and things are starting to happen where the spirits aren't really being held in check, so there's something going on with the queen, and we follow a main character who, as a result of the spirits not being held in check, lost her home village at a very young age, and now is determined to try and become the next queen, even though she is definitely not the best, which is kind of a cool setup to have a main character who's not the best at everything. Clearly, they're the chosen one. They're very obviously not as good as some of the other contenders. But I found that I really sympathized with this character, and we also follow a knight type character who was kind of in disgrace, and you see them train this main character, Delena. I really, really enjoyed this trilogy for the most part. The second book I thought was much better paced than the first, because the first takes a place over a large amount of time, and the second one zeroes in a lot more. You do focus a little bit more on a different character, so that might not appeal to everyone. The third one I thought was a good balance between these characters, but I didn't love the ending. But that's so subjective, so I still highly recommend the trilogy. It's very interesting, and the books are very short. It doesn't take very much time to get through them. Queen's Thief was so much fun while also being kind of boring. So I really enjoyed this. We follow a young man who, I know that the premise doesn't sound like it makes sense, but it does, I promise. If you read it, it explains itself. But basically, they tried to steal something from the king, and their skill was so good that the king now wants to use them to steal something for them. So you have this character who has to embark on this journey, but they're technically still held prisoner. And they're with these companions who are like kind of mean, and not a ton happens. But I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I thought the main character's voice in the book was very amusing. I thought that the book at times was quite clever, and I'm really excited to see where it goes next. Next, we have Ninth Reign, one of my favorite books of this year. Such a hidden gem. If you get your hands on it, highly recommend it. Such an awesome blend of so many different subgenres of fantasy. You kind of take some paranormal things, and there's also some technology in the world, but you don't really understand it, and the characters don't really understand it because it's more like the remains from previous wars. And it's so unique and it's so interesting, and I feel like it's really well realized, and there's a ton of discovery as the book goes on, and the main characters are very likable. It's really cool. I highly recommend it. I can't wait to read the next 2. House of Dragons follows 5 main point of views, and they originally start off in this competition type story, but then there's a lot more depth to their characters as the story progresses. I thought it was just going to be a good old time and be a lot of fun, but then as it continues, it actually gets quite serious and has a lot of depth, which I wasn't expecting, and the dragons in this book are basically their own characters, which is a lot of fun. I have heard some interesting things go down on Twitter with the author, but I'm gonna do one of those separate art from artist things, and I want to see what happens in the sequel. So hopefully they were sincere in their apology, because it was weird. Spin the Dawn is another one that I actually already completed. I read its sequel, Unravel the Dusk, and it is just a duology. I think a lot of people are going to find themselves disappointed if they have only heard the marketing for this book, which is that it's a Project Runway Mulan combination, when really that's kind of where we start off with the story, where a main character goes in place of their father to compete to become the Emperor's tailor, which is normally a position that only men can do. So they disguise themselves as a boy to protect their father. And then it turns into kind of a traveling adventure love story. And I don't think a lot of people were expecting that. I know I wasn't expecting it. But I ended up having a good time with it. And then I picked up the sequel, and then I had a good time with that too. And so, yeah, I ended up liking it. It's not my top 5 favorite or anything like that, but it was enjoyable and it was cute. And sometimes I just want enjoyable and cute. The last two of my favorites, Fireborn by Rosario Munda and The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. Cannot wait to read the sequels to these. The Knife of Never Letting Go, I just recently finished, and it is so bizarre. You follow this isolated group of men, and men only, because something has happened that has killed all the women, and they have noise, which is their thoughts and the thoughts of animals projected to where everybody can hear everybody's noise all the time. And our main characters, something happens where they then have to go on the run, and they are being hunted. And that's the most I feel like I can say, because part of the appeal of this book is the what the heck is happening. It's told in a very interesting way, the way that the noise is presented in the book, as well as the fact that our main character is not particularly educated. And so the writing is a reflection of that, because things are constantly misspelled. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's very fast-paced. It was really good. And then Fireborn, this one is heavy political fantasy. If you're not a fan of political fantasy, I don't know that you will like it very much. And also, it's kind of like a examination of trauma in our 2 main characters. So we have an Anastasia-like character. His name is Lee. His family was terrible, and so they were overthrown. And he lived, and he became an orphan, and nobody really knew who he was, what his family ties were. But now the land celebrates the day that they slaughtered his family. He has major PTSD. And one person that he meets at the orphanage is a little girl named Annie, whose family was killed by Lee's family when she was young. So she can kind of tell something's up with him. She can kind of tell he talks a little extra fancy when they're really little. And so she's kind of got her suspicions. But also, they're orphans together, and they create they have this bond, this friendship that's very strong. But as they grow up, they kind of are learning what the other person is to them, both in that they are friends, but also like, oh, hey, like, your family killed my family. Except for neither of us have ever vocalized this before. And it's also a really big secret that you're alive. And there's tons of political stuff going on where the new form of government surely is better than the former, except for maybe it's not. And it gets really sad and really serious, and it's kind of a bummer, and I loved it. Hopefully, I will love the other series that I start and will want to continue those. Also, the ones that I'm planning on reading before the end of the year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.